Meanwhile, the hostilities continue in Israel and in Palestine, particularly the Gaza Strip. The Israeli warplanes have continued to pound Gaza, killing more and more civilians. The essential dynamic that you have to understand, that has really, in many respects, always been the case. And, you know, people will argue what was the first offense in this skirmish? And I think most reasonable people agree that the first skirmish here was essentially what amounts to an ethnic cleansing of East Jerusalem and of a neighborhood that has where the Israeli government is essentially continuing its latest move of dispossession of Palestinians. They want to cleanse that area of Palestinians in the East Jerusalem. But the one dynamic that I think there's no controversy about is that the Israeli government has the strongest military, by far in the region, has a much greater capacity to kill, particularly civilians for that matter, but really anyone.
And that bears out in the numbers.
Than the Palestinians.
Of dead. And
yes.
Yeah.
It totally bears out in the numbers. But I mean, you don't even, if you had asked me randomly 6 months ago if the Israeli government was to engage in war or hostilities or whatever you want to call it with Palestinians in Gaza, Hamas, it doesn't matter. I could tell you that every day those hostilities continue on, there will be a growing gulf between the number of Palestinians dead, civilians, and Israelis, because that dynamic is blatant and obvious. And so you don't need the numbers to know that was going to happen, but it's completely consistent with what we know. So the point being, every day these hostilities continue. Any reasonable person knows that means more Palestinian civilians, men, women, and children, will die. And there'll be an increasing number, and the rate of those deaths will increase. Never mind the implications long term in terms of infrastructure. The Israelis have an equal ability to damage the infrastructure of people living in Gaza, which has been described as the world's largest open air prison. And so you don't need to know any of the facts. You simply need to know that dynamic and know what's going to happen day to day. So the fact that the Biden administration is standing in the way of the UN issuing a ceasefire, I don't know if Israel would listen to a ceasefire or Hamas would. But
not that they listened to the United Nations before and their creation of the borders that they violate every day.
But it's obviously important enough that the Biden administration feels that we need to stop it.
Yeah.
So it does create pressure. When the Biden administration does that, they know exactly what the implications of that are. That is not a neutral decision. This is if a 250-pound guy and a 110-pound guy get into a fight, in the cafeteria, as it were, wherever, and the teachers around there or whoever say like, oh, we're going to let them fight. That's not a neutral decision. That is a decision to allow the 250-pound guy to destroy the 110-pound guy.
And the teacher's handing nunchucks to the 250-pound guy.
Well, that's also, yes. Well, that's when you start to bring in the sales of arms. But I raised that dynamic just because here is Fox News attempting to both protect the storyline of Israel killing so many civilians, and also be able to make it seem like Joe Biden is somehow not doing enough for Israel.
Absolutely. You know, Israel has been one of our strongest allies in the Middle East forever, and we are theirs. And that is why the Republican Party is pretty much united. The Republicans in Congress have been asking Joe Biden to take a firm stance on Israel, but Joe Biden is reluctant to. He has, the White House has announced he's spoken on Saturday to both sides, but for the most part, he has been quiet. He's really not taken a side. And most of Congress has been silent on the fighting. You know, usually by this point in a conflict, there would be a bipartisan resolution passed in the Congress talking about a ceasefire. There has been, the committees haven't even talked about something that would have been automatic.
Like I say, the neutrality is, well, first of all, you're blocking a call for a ceasefire, and you know the implications of that. There has been a $35 million sale of weapons, precision-guided weapons to Israel.
But he also sent $735 million in precision-guided missiles to Palestine and Hamas, right?
That is not the case, actually.
Oh,
but at the very
okay.
least, they have made it very clear that Israel has the right to defend itself.
Yeah, they've said that over and over and over again, and that's the repeated line, even when confronted with the tens of children that have died in Palestine, the disproportionate number of civilian deaths that have occurred or at the direct hand of the Israeli government, the fact that Israel instigated this conflict by raiding the Al-Aqsa Mosque and Aqsa. Jesus, I'm picking up verbal tics from you. So I mean, there's never a discussion about that, but I don't even know what Biden could have done differently besides coming out draped in an Israeli flag to make Steve Doocy comfortable in this situation, because I've been disgusted by the Biden administration's response every single step of the way.
Well, Doocy would have said at that point that he's desecrating the flag.
Yeah, you're right.
He would have found something.
He's like, why not an American flag? Where does your allegiances lie?
All right. Well, we got to take a quick break. When we come back, we will be shifting focus. We'll be talking to Aviva Chomsky about the now forgotten American history of its role in Central America, and its role in creating this attempts for people to migrate from countries that are that have been basically derailed for decades because of American intervention. We will be right back after this.